connecting as a couple is so essential because we're all trying to hold our families together, right? The couple are the glue that binds. So without the couple, we lose the family. And so I think that so many people lose themselves in children, the business of marriage, that, by the end of it, by the time your kids have left the house, you look and you say, well, who is this person?
Hey everyone, I'm Meredith Shirey. I'm a licensed psychotherapist specializing in relationship issues.
And I'm Isaiah Vallejo-Justy, a divorce attorney.
This is a podcast about filling in the gaps of our relationships, the deeply personal choices we make for our families and ourselves,
and the impact our actions have on the rest of our lives. This is Love Me or Leave Me. How to human? That's a great question you asked, Meredith, at the end of the last episode. Here we are about to go through the second wave of the pandemic, right? We're recording this in late November, and it's just a quick question to ask right now. A lot of the things that we could do in the summer, we kind of can't do anymore. And now we're going back to, hopefully not, but we could be going back to where we were in March and April, right? So with that said, it's so difficult to try to figure out, how to remain safe and what are we doing nowadays, right? I mean, one of the things that I've been encountering very lately is working from home, and how do we separate those boundaries? You understand? And how do we maintain our mental health when we do so? Because while I love working from home, right? It's great. You wake up in the morning, 10 seconds away from your office, and it's fine, right? It's great. You don't have to get on the bus. You don't have to get on the train. You're at home. But on the flip side of that, you're at home, right? That's where you live. And while somebody like me, I love to work from home, but I much rather live at home.
That is the key point there, living at home versus living at work. Because when we don't have the separating work from home, which was a struggle for people way before the pandemic, is that much more because you don't have the same separation. So one thing that I recommend people doing is exactly what you said. As we're going into the second wave, let's get ahead of the conflicts and the pitfalls because it is going to look really different. You're not going to have the same activities and outlets to cope that you might have in the summer. So if your kids were driving you crazy, you couldn't, go for a swim or, go hiking, something like that. One thing that I recommend doing that I think a lot of us did not realize the utility of it was our commute, because your commute was your time to either gear up for work or dial down when you were coming home, which allowed you to relax when you got home, right? So you said, I want to relax at home. I don't want to work at home. So one thing that I think is really essential is creating some kind of commute. If that means that you walk around your house, if it's 10 feet of snow and you just run up and down your stairs a couple times, if you scream into a pillow for 30 seconds, if you take 10, 15 minutes and meditate, something to switch your mode from being at work in the office to being at home. The other thing about that is you need to separate out the spaces where you work and where you relax. And I cannot say this enough. If we hear nothing else, please hear this. Do not work in your bedroom, please.
It's funny that you say that because I literally lived that life, right? First couple months of the pandemic, I was working out of my bedroom. My wife was working out at a dining room table. And it got to the point where it was like, no, this is going to stop now, right? Because it became very mentally challenging. And so what we did is we moved into that famous 1940s spare room that we had with the 1940s wallpaper. And ever since then, you're right, it's been a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing too, and again, you don't have to do this to the full extent because I will fully admit guilt here, but try to dress a little more like you would at the office, so put on pants is a good starter. Put on a different pair of pants than the ones you've been wearing all week if you can. And at least somewhat try to look like you're looking the part, because part of being in your loungewear the entire time, again, there is something that your brain does to separate, okay, these physical tactile things about being at home versus being at work. And so the more you can engineer that in a different way, it's going to help you to actually make that separation. Because again, we're having to be more cognizant.
Well, in my house, jeans are like evening wear nowadays. So are you saying that I can't hang out in my sweatpants and top suit anymore? I call it my top suit. So if I have to appear in court, I have the top part of me is in a suit and the bottom part of me is in my sweatpants. Are you saying I shouldn't do that?
I mean, if jeans are considered black tie, maybe there's a middle ground, or maybe it's your nice pair of sweatpants. If you've got some gradation there. But the point is, don't do it every day. Like, I know for me personally, on the days when I do actually, put on a blazer or my cardigan therapist uniform, I feel a little better. I feel a little more in my element, and it feels a little more like I'm working. And then when I change after, it feels a little more like I'm getting into relax mode. And so I'm actually able to make that separation more. So you don't have to, but it might just be something to help you, again, mentally make sure you're making that separation, because physically we might not be able to do that like we used to.
So are you saying I can't do things like check my email at 3 o'clock in the morning when I wake up in the middle of the night? Is that unhealthy?
For a number of reasons. Yes, please don't do that. I'm sure that your partner probably doesn't appreciate the blue light in the middle of the night either. And speaking of that, it's a big part of this too, is making sure that all the fights that we had the first time around don't become a sticking point. I know we talked last time about the fact that it seems like after March and April, when the courts were closed, divorce rates have been on the rise. And so getting ahead of the conflicts and being really proactive in your communication, coming up with the game plans now is really, really essential, because it helps us to eliminate those negative assumptions about the things that our partner may or may not feel before they actually become a problem, before they become a fight.
I think that's a great idea. I try to do that with my wife, and it could be a real struggle given the whole work from home environment and creating the boundaries and separating out space. Now the kids are in virtual school, right? At least my kids are, and all of New York City is right now, and that I find to be so difficult. My kids are okay, but would I rather have them in school and speaking with their friends and hanging out and doing their clubs and all of that? Absolutely, but that's just not the situation that we're in. My kids are completely virtual. Well, my son is technically pre-K. My daughter is in the third grade. And so we chose virtual school, but we don't judge either, right? We don't judge any parent. The parents that are choosing virtual school because they're saying, they have health concerns for the kids and maybe their family members if their kids, God forbid, bring something home. The parents that are choosing in-person schooling are choosing it. They're worried about their kids' mental health. And maybe that's their greatest concern. Or maybe they're first responders and have jobs where they have to physically go into their place of employment. So we really don't judge, but for us, it's virtual schooling.
And like you said, it's so different for each child and each family. And I loved what you said there about taking the judgment out of it. Because the fact is, there isn't one that's necessarily better or worse for kids. It depends on your kid and your family. That's what really matters here. And I imagine that for you and your wife, the added pressure too, not only of you guys having to take on the job of teacher, in addition to that, you're both working professionals, and you specifically have a job like mine where we have this responsibility for maintaining client confidentiality. I would imagine that's fairly difficult when we all have to figure out how to have separate spaces.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'll just leave the room that we're in, right? I'll go to the bedroom, and I know that's a violation of one of your edicts there. But I'll go to the bedroom, or I'll go to the car. I spend hours in the car on the phone sometimes, or I'll ask for privacy in the room if I have to do that. We have various different ways. Both my wife and I deal with some sensitive issues, so we have various different ways of doing that.
I'd imagine that's helpful that you both have jobs where you deal with this sensitivity, because it probably gives you both a better understanding of when the other person's saying, I need privacy. You're not pushing the other person away. You're saying, this is something I need to be able to maintain my professional role. That is something where if one person doesn't have that, they don't quite necessarily understand unless you explicitly tell them, this is what I need. This is what's okay. This is what's not okay, which is, again, why it's really important to talk about boundaries and expectations and give how they can honor your boundaries, and tell them a little bit more about why. I think giving the context makes all the difference in the world, right? Again, it's not, I'm trying to get away from you. It's that I cannot have you in the same room or hearing what's going on, because that's dangerous for the client.
Meredith, you're right about what you talk about the need to communicate and set the boundaries between you and your spouse or your partner while you're working from home, right? Because it's so important to have those boundaries and to establish those lines of communication. In my house, there's two other people here who aren't necessarily the most logical beings in the world. Our kids, and setting boundaries with them is near impossible, right? Because your kids literally want to be on top of you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's, mommy, 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 and daddy, daddy, daddy. And what I find with them is like they're so happy you're home. Like I said in the last episode, went from 15 minutes to 24 hours. They're thrilled to have me here. But then they don't understand, no, daddy has to work now. Right. So it's hard to establish those boundaries. Or they have to be in school now, and that my kids are doing virtual schooling here. Not everybody is, but that's what we're doing. So we have a super need to have those boundaries.
I think that kids being in school period probably helps that, but that's why the consistency and having a schedule, and again, creating as much of a normal work week as you can without actually going to the office, the better. Having a separate room, and even having some kind of like a sign on the door if your kids are too young to read, some kind of family rule and code that when mom or dad are in this room, you're not allowed to come in, right? This is when we're working. And I think establishing that and telling them that this means I'm not here, basically. Talking to them in that way. And then also saying it not just from a place of punishment and discipline, but saying, but when I come out, I'm so excited to see you. And that's why the piece about attunement during all of this is really, really important, because yes, we are on top of each other. We're spending a lot more time together. Time together in the temporal sense doesn't necessarily equate to quality time in the emotional connecting sense. So when you are not in the office, make sure that you are creating space to connect with your children, because believe it or not, that is actually going to make them more likely to adhere to those boundaries about when you're in the office being, at the table or in the next room, wherever that is, because they're not worried about the next time they're going to get that. They're expecting that. So I think when it comes to virtual school versus in person, one, again, all the more important to talk to your spouse about it, because boundaries are really important. And because you're both then taking on the role of teacher in addition to everything else you're doing. And that puts a lot more pressure on your relationship. How are you and your spouse going about negotiating that with having two young kids?
Well, I mean, basically, I'll find a space of quiet. I'll either go to the car, and I've been in the car for many hours before, and it's a little heavenly because it's quiet, and sometimes we'll sneak a nap in the car. I don't know what my neighbors think of me, because they'll walk by several times as I'm in the car.
They probably just want to make sure you're alive and you're like not dead in there.
Yeah, and one time my wife snuck a nap in the car, and she was like, "This is the best sleep ever." So we'll do that, or I'll go to a different room. I go to the bedroom. I know that's a breaking of one of the rules, but I'll go to the bedroom, and that seems to be okay. But yeah, so those will come as kind of some of the tactics that we've taken. Maybe we'll schedule something when the kids are like in front of their screens during virtual school, during the live part. That's something else that we try to do.
Oh, that's so smart. I think that is a really good takeaway to give people is make sure that you know what your office hours are. Make sure you're communicating that to one another. And yeah, take advantage of the time when your kids are doing something else and when you can carve out that privacy and that kind of thing.
Have you seen couples that you've given therapy to that disagree on in-person versus virtual schooling, or have you heard of that?
I haven't seen too many disagreements on that. I think that for parents in any situation in every family, it's just negotiating again, what are our needs and what are the needs for the individual? What are the needs for the group, for our family? And I think every couple and every family weigh that very, very differently.
Yeah, no, I have friends that have had some disagreements, and I think it's important just to communicate with each other about the issue and then make the best decision that you can. In the divorce world, there's always disagreement on various things, and I try to counsel people just to do the best thing you think, to make the best decision as a parent that you can.
Right. And I think making the best decision you can with the information you have. And as we know, that's changing quite a bit. So this conversation might come up when a vaccine becomes readily available. Have you seen this in terms of disagreement or in terms of trying to negotiate those boundaries with couples, maybe who are going through a divorce and can't actually live separately?
Yes, that certainly happens. And the bottom line there is that the parents have to try to come to a decision, right? And the courts don't really want to get involved in that. I mean, I guess if you force the court to make a decision, it would make some decision. It would take a while. It's not like there's a law out there that says, thou shalt put your child in person or thou shalt put your child in virtual school. It's going to come down to what's the best decision for that individual child. And really, parents are better off making that decision on their own, right? Because if you make the decision on your own, whether you agree with it or you don't, you have input. When a
Right.
judge makes a decision, you have no input. Usually somebody's going to be happy and somebody's not going to be happy, or more often neither party is going to be happy.
I could see that. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think in so many ways in this pandemic, people are looking to replace the control that we've lost in other ways, and in other ways, it's like we're abdicating our responsibility and control. So I think that that's such a good point about you need to make the decision for your child. Don't let a judge make it. But that also means that you and your former partner are going to have to find some means of coming to an agreement, even if it doesn't mean you necessarily get your way. But we have to find something that feels like it's meeting the needs and we're not just abdicating responsibility for making the decision.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that goes with all things, right? It's not just
Mm.
with school, but with everything generally, right? Because we're more than just work and school, right? There's so much more to us than that.
That's so true. And things like the need for culture and incorporating faith and religion, those kinds of things. I know that those are things that parents and families in general are worried about losing for themselves, for their family, for their kids. And one thing that I think was is really helpful is as much as you can take those times for bonding with your family, having some fun, and using that creatively to incorporate things like if you practice religion, have a conversation, do the online church. Please don't go in person. I don't think that's safe yet. But have a conversation about what was talked about that day during worship. Make worship something that you do as a family. And for culture, do a virtual museum visit and then talk about what was your favorite thing that you saw. Or make a food or something from a country that you're talking about and almost have like a family report on it. Everyone's going to learn something about this country. The point is that you can be really creative and you can use it for time again to bond and to have really positive experiences. One of the things that I think is helpful, especially as parents navigating relationships with your kids, and then also as partners navigating your romantic relationship, is this big piece of attunement and listening to one another and tuning in. And there's some real opportunities right now to relearn one another and making sure that you're scheduling time to check in, to really look and see, and to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on in your world? And to really relearn one another. That will circumvent so many areas of conflict. And so the more we can circumvent the conflict and move more from like discipline and fight and waiting till things are a problem to finding reframes before they're a problem, the more likely you're to have a positive quarantine experience.
You have to have a good time,
Right.
right? You have to figure out how to have a good time. And, trying to figure out ways to do what you did before at home or in the backyard or in a park, right? And we've done some of that. So much with us is like so much of being in a relationship or so much of being a parent involves other things, right? And a lot of that gets stripped away. Like, when the kids were bored at home in the past, we would take them to a trampoline park. If you ever want to imagine, I don't know, a couple hundred kids under the age of 10 jumping on trampolines, that's literally what it was. I cannot possibly think of perhaps a more unsafe practice right now, but that's gone. So,
Right.
what do you do? How do you burn that excess energy? So I'm telling you, trampoline park, 1 hour, your kids are done. They're done. You take them home, they're ready to go to sleep, shower, sleep. It's great. It's fantastic. But
I mean, I did that as an adult and I was worn out after 15 minutes and thought I was going to kill some kids because I'm bigger. Well, actually, no, I was the same size as them, but colliding with them. So I hear you on that one.
yeah, so it's just like just trying to figure out those things. And, we've had some fun stuff and cooking together and things like that. But, sometimes it's probably a little bit too much screen time and, just trying to get through the day. And I think you have to give yourself space to be imperfect too, right? We're all like we keep saying, we're all just human. You're trying to figure this out. There's nothing in our cultural DNA about this, right? Our grandparents didn't go through this. So, and it's the first time that we're able to do this like this, right? Like on the internet. So it's different.
That's so true. And to your point too, I know that it's a little bit different for you because your kids are a bit younger. And I think a lot of parents, and I'd imagine you and your spouse are included in this, it feels like there's a lot of pressure on parents to entertain the kids. And it's like, okay, give them screens, don't give them too many screens. And then you need to do all these things. And you're right, you don't have to be the perfect parent. And you don't always have to have something lined up for your kids. If they're younger and you're going to take away the screen, do try to have some kind of structured activity in place. But especially as they get a little older, so your child who's around 8, that's a great time to say, hey, go be outside and make up a game, right? Go ride your bike or do something. I promise you, boredom will not kill your children. They might try to tell you it will, but there are 0 deaths attributed to boredom, I promise.
Yeah. The next time my kids are bored, I'll tell them to try to be more creative. I don't know how it will work, but you're right. Out of the boredom come the dance parties and the new games they invent and all those types of things. And I think kids are pretty resilient and they figure themselves out of this thing. I think it's also important not to forget the couple, the people in the relationship. That's so easy to do, right? Because right now you have to be everything for the children. You have to be teacher, you have to be parent, you have to be friend, you have to be caretaker, everything. And at the same time, technically right now you have to be the same thing for your partner, your spouse, right? You have to be the best friend, the coworker, the therapist, the partner, everything, even if and while the world appears to be crumbling around you.
I used this quote last time, I'll use it again from Esther Perel, that what we used to get from a village, we now try to get from one person. And during quarantine, we don't even have anyone else outside to supplement that. And so if you and your partner have different levels or needs in terms of socialization, that can really create some dissonance and be a real hotbed for conflict. And so this is why, again, the name of the game here is communication. The more you talk about what your needs are, the more you're going to be able to mitigate having those escalating fights. And to your point, yes, connecting as a couple is so essential because we're all trying to hold our families together, right? The couple are the glue that binds. So without the couple, we lose the family. And so I think that so many people lose themselves in children, the business of marriage, that, by the end of it, by the time your kids have left the house, you look and you say, well, who is this person? I'd imagine you probably see that in your office quite a bit.
Yeah, it does happen that, a popular time to kind of go through a divorce is when the children have left the home, right? And some of that is because, like you said, you look at your spouse and say, well, who is this person, right? I haven't spoken to this person in years. Very true.
Yeah, and that's actually why now more than ever, if we have this time together, learn your partner. Again, quoting my girl, Esther Perel, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 great loves in your life. And if you're very lucky, you can have them with the same person. And the meaning there is that throughout this entire process, none of us are the same people that we were in the beginning of 2020. None of us are. And that's okay. That doesn't have to be the threat to your relationship. What you can do to reframe that, though, is to think about the excitement and the novelty of getting to know this new person. And to do that, you're going to have to find some time for dates at home.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We, in my house, we call that revenge, right? Something that we read about.
Okay, say more.
Yeah, so something we read about called revenge bedtime procrastination. And it's like when you've lost all control of your life, you take revenge by stealing time before you go to sleep. And so, in the beginning, my wife and I were up to about 3, 4, sometimes 5 o'clock in the morning on a regular basis. And it was great because that was kind of the time that we would spend with each other and probably watching way too much Netflix. But yeah, that's what we did. And it worked really well. Now with the virtual schooling being live, we have to go to sleep a little earlier, but we still manage to go to sleep. It's probably usually around 2 o'clock in the morning, honestly, which is probably not the healthiest thing for for your body, but mentally, I mean, that really works for me.
Like you said, it gives you time for you and your wife to check out. And I actually love that you're calling it revenge because it's putting the impetus on you guys as a couple joining. And I know you love your children. So this isn't meaning like there's malice towards a kid, but it's putting you and your wife on a team together and having that kind of cohesion. That is really the secret sauce of making a marriage work and actually growing closer despite all these crazy times and challenges. So it's really, really cool that you guys are already baking that into your routine. That's incredible. So have you guys thought of anything fun for date nights or have you had anything creative you can do?
Again, we do a lot of Netflix. We'll go on drives. We'll cook dinner. I like to cook a lot. So the other day I made like short ribs and polenta, or I'll make beef bourguignon, or coq au vin, or I got into this like very French period, and then I got into this very Mexican period. So we were making like a lot of tacos, and we learned how to make tortillas from scratch. That's because we ran out of bread, and we were like, this is like back in April, and we were like, where are we gonna get bread from? So I said, no problem. We're gonna order. The only things that we could order was the corn flour. And so it's okay. We're gonna order corn flour from like the knockoff Amazon site, or I think it was Sam's Club site, whatever it was. And we ordered it. We started making tortillas, and then I was like, all right, well, let's try making different type of tacos. We do all different types of things, and now we're bored again. So now we're in Ireland land. So I made the other day with the beef and the potatoes on
shepherd's
top.
pie?
Shepherd's pie. Yeah, I made shepherd's pie the other day. Can't believe I forgot that. But yeah.
It's okay. It's not because I'm Irish. I went to Dublin a few years ago and that was on every menu. And I specifically don't like shepherd's pie. And so I had a really hard time eating in Ireland. I was like, wait, this is all meat and potatoes? Oh yeah, that's kind of what you're known for, right?
I promise you like my shepherd's pie.
I probably would because, we've talked a lot about the Spanish cooking and that kind of thing. I probably would because I bet you spiced it up and made it good.
Indeed, I did.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's great that you guys found a way to be creative within your cooking. There are a lot of things you can try to do for date night. Just again, I think the point is time with your spouse where you're not concentrating on the kids. We're not just doing this business of marriage and managing the children in the household. We're actually getting to know one another again. And part of how you can make date night special, even if, again, you're just kind of cooking. So here's an idea for you. You can try this. Hopefully your wife's not listening to this one. If you're listening, just tune out real quick. So the next time she's cooking, you can do pandemic black tie, but dress up, put on something nice. And it might surprise her, right? Don't tell her you're doing this. And come in with, even if you just kind of throw together like some fake flowers you pull out of a vase somewhere else in the house or something silly like that, but treat it as though you were like going for a date, before you guys were married or something novel, something that says, hey, I care about you enough to show you that I'm making some effort. Again, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Those are the little things that tell your partner, I'm still in this with you. I still like you and care about you enough to want to impress you.
It's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just about being open to new things in a different world, right? Maybe it's just about being a little flexible.
Exactly. If you take one thing from this, the best thing you can be right now for yourself, for your partner, for your children, for your family, be flexible, be patient and be flexible and talk about things. I think in our next episode, we're going to be talking about communication because it's so important to have some strategies, right? We've been saying, hey, talk to your spouse, talk to your children. So I think it's really important that we actually talk about how to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I always say that, communication is probably the most important thing in a marriage. And the question people always ask me is, what is the most contributing factor to getting a divorce? And my answer is always, it's not affairs, it's not any of that. It's communication. All of that other stuff usually comes as a result of a lack of communication. And perhaps, being flexible and having the dates from home and all of that, that's what that's really saying, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. Maybe what we take away from this and from this episode is to remember to give each other space, right? To be flexible, okay? To listen to each other. Also to recognize that we may not always be in the best moods, right? We might be a little depressed, and give ourselves space to be depressed, but also create opportunities for ourselves to be better.
I love that.
Love Me or Leave Me is a podcast production of the Board brand. This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical or legal advice and is not a substitute for professional consultation, diagnoses, or treatment. Always follow up with a licensed attorney or healthcare professional who can address your specific needs. Thanks for listening.